chú bay choác sức là chú bay ơi, chú bay ơi, là làm chụp này. Wow!
kuja dancing kupenda. Kuja kupa food kupenda. Tutakuacha wewe. Acha kumganyanga na wewe. Tutakuacha wewe kuja kule tena. Sikuja kule tena. Kuja kule tena. Kuja kule tena. Kuna basi keki.
Vital parliamentary traditions to which members of both houses dedicate yourselves with such personal commitment to the betterment of us all.
Oh, I thought you were for real. Hasan.
Rama, what is that? I find the princess. Shoes working.
Dante, kula food ama nichukue simu?
You get to actually bargain. Good morning, class. You have hair in your intestines. Oh wow, a giant egg. I wonder what's inside. Let's find out by cracking it open. Wow, there were 6 small eggs inside the big egg. How about we use the eggs to make a birthday cake? And we can even learn some Spanish while we're at it. Let's start with the first egg. It's the color pink or rosa. Let's crack it open. Wow, look at that. It's a cute chick inside. Maybe she'd like to go in our egg carton. We'll need to match her to the correct shape. This one is a triangle or triangulo. Here we go. Here's a triangle. And look, now she's happy. And now we have 1 yolk to go in our cake. So I'll turn the dial to uno. And now for our next egg. How cute. This one's orange or naranja. Let's give it a crack to see what's inside. Look, it's orange yolk. And look at that. There's a cute orange chick inside. Let's find the right shape for this one. It's a circle or circulo. Isn't it neat how some of the Spanish words sound similar? And now we have 2 yolks. So I'll turn the dial up to dos. Check out our next egg. It's smiling, and it's my favorite color, blue or azul. And this blue chick has the shape of a star or estrella. So let's find the star in our egg carton. Great job, guys! Now she's happy, and we have 3 yolks in our bowl. So I'll turn the dial to trace. And our next egg is this screaming one. And it's the color yellow or amarillo. And look at that, the chick inside isn't screaming at all. She looks happy. And her shape is a square or cuadrado. And she goes right there in the square. There and square rhyme because they sound similar. And now that we have 4 yolks, we can turn the dial up to cuatro. We have 2 more eggs. This one here is purple or purpura. So let's add it to our cake mix by cracking it on the bowl. Ew, purple yolk. Let's find the shape of this chick. It's a cross or cruise, and it goes right here in our egg carton. And now we have 5 wiggly yolks in our bowl. So let's turn the dial up to 5. Alright, now for our last egg. This one's green or verde.
Wih, kidogo nikupe.
To get the yolk that's inside. In our final cake.
Oi, vamos a cañón.
Me porta, me dime.
No sé. Shika.
Me pone ini. Tadi kapra again.
Good.
YouTube. Go.
Hebu. Sawa sawa.
It's not walking.
Okay. Shika.
This is not walking.
Shika Ramon.
Okay, okay.
Walking bunny. No for no. Caramel. Caramel.
Ramon. Shika hii. Chapa dante. Amka basi. Maliza basi simbakuwa kiti.
Dada ananisemea mate. Daddy. Dada
It's where the soldiers who look after the monarch become very well known to the royal family because they're often around the estate. And doubtless the king will recognise many of them. The inspection by the king, of course, is by nature to thank them for the respect that they have given him, but also for him to just look into the eye of those who are now dedicated with their lives to serve him, not only in peace, but also, if called, in war. That loyalty, which was vested by every soldier, sailor, airman and woman to Queen Elizabeth II, has now passed to the new king. Gun salute is complete. Guns will be cleared. And we concentrate on the palace as the king will take leave of the guard commander. With great courtesy, the king thanks him very much indeed, and the General Officer of Scotland, Major General Bill Wright, escorts the king over to the Lord Provost, who will present the key of the city of Edinburgh. Of course, they met very recently at the airport. He was the first to greet His Majesty down the steps of the aircraft and then managed to get here in good time. So he will take the keys, and because we can't hear him, the words are, I say again, we, the Lord Provost and members of the City of Edinburgh Council, welcome Your Majesty to the capital of the city of your ancient and hereditary Kingdom of Scotland, and offer for your gracious acceptance the keys of Your Majesty's good city of Edinburgh. And he replies, I return these keys being perfectly convinced that they cannot be placed in better hands than those of the Lord Provost and councillors of my good city of Edinburgh. And with that, the Lord Provost introduces His Majesty to those good councillors of the city of Edinburgh. It was only earlier this year that at local elections, these councillors were returned, and they, having returned, elected one of their number to become Lord Provost. Lord Provost served for 5 years, and so present Lord Provost had literally just met the Queen at the Queen's visit here in June, and then finds that at the beginning of his time, just as we all do, so much has changed. The Lord Provost's husband is a children's oncologist working in London, and he returns as often as he can to support the Lord Provost. And the king will now go in and reunite himself with his brothers and sister. I'm sure he will go and take time in the throne room to see Queen Elizabeth II lying at rest, and His Majesty will have lunch before the ceremonial of this afternoon. Meanwhile, the Lord Provost, with the sword and mace of the city, take their leave of this parade. The Royal Company of Archers, who we see behind those who were presented to the King just now with their eagle's feathers and the forest green uniform designed for them by the great Scottish historian Sir Walter Scott, stand sentinel for their new king. And again, beautiful sunshine here in Edinburgh. It's been a very warm summer for us all, but the sun and the flitting cloud across the hills of Arthur's Seat nearby. It's one of the most beautiful gardens at the Palace of Holyrood House, looking across to a ha-ha wall which takes the green of the lawn directly into the hills that lead to Arthur's Seat. Meanwhile, people gathering in the High Kirk of St Giles. St Giles, where later on the procession will come and bring Queen Elizabeth II. And again, members of the Royal Company of Archers are welcoming guests to this event. People have come from all over Scotland who applied for tickets to come here, and it's not long now before the Queen will be brought here to lie with the Crown of Scots placed upon the coffin as we recognise people coming in. There are representatives of Scottish life, but amongst those who are gathered, I see one of the archers there, one of the Queen's former neighbours from Kincardine O'Neill near Balmoral, showing people to their seats. It is a nation where many people from different parts of Scotland, which is made up of so many different communities, right out to the islands, up to the very north, the Western Isles, the far Highlands, all coming together to be part of this gathering. And they released tickets for those who wanted to come in the general public, and shortly they will be filling these seats. It's some time, though, since the service will begin. We'll see a start to the procession later on, bringing the Queen up here. So at about 2:35, in about an hour and 10 minutes, 20 minutes, the procession will leave Holyrood. It's not a great distance. We've just seen as the King passed down the Royal Mile. But it will be a moving and slow procession, followed by members of the royal family. The scarlet being worn there of the former Queen's chaplains, now the King's chaplains, and here knights of the most ancient and most noble order of the Thistle, including Sir David Steele, Lord Patel, and others being brought in to take their seats. As knights of the most ancient and most noble order of the Thistle, they wear that silver star that incorporates the cross of St Andrew on their left breast. And the Queen, of course, was sovereign head of the Order of the Thistle, which has its home here in St Giles. And now the sovereign of the order is the King.
Well, let's perhaps come away from St Giles Cathedral for just a moment. The service, they're not due to start until shortly before 3 o'clock, and certainly plenty more from Alistair Bruce when it does. But perhaps we should reflect on that which we just saw immediately before pictures from inside the cathedral. King Charles III arriving at Holyrood Palace with the Queen Consort. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills is here. Louise Tate, formerly the Queen's Scottish Communications Director, also alongside me. Let's just reflect a little moment, can we, Rhiannon, on protocol. And something that has struck me a couple of times over the past couple of days. Upon exiting the rather snazzy limo that he arrived in, King Charles and Camilla both went straight over to the crowds, arms outstretched, shaking hands. Were we expecting that?
No, we weren't. And as we hear those involved in the procession on the forecourt heading away, the drums beating away, within the plans around the death of Queen Elizabeth II and also the succession of King Charles III, of course, these plans have been decades in the making. But it's these moments, I think, that are cementing in our minds what kind of monarch the new king wants to be.
Are you allowed to touch the monarch in that fashion? It's a really straightforward question, because I remember an Australian Prime Minister falling foul of a misplaced hand on the Queen's back at one point.
I think when it comes to members of the public, the former Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, has always been keen to get out of a car and make a beeline to anyone who's bothered to come out to see him. I've witnessed that on so many occasions when it comes to engagements and overseas tours. And also, of course, cameras trained on the new king, but you can't forget that the Queen Consort also, over the years, she has very much fallen into line and knows that it's her responsibility to also make sure that anyone who's come out, they feel that they have had that connection with a member of the royal family. And don't forget, it was actually Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip who started that whole institution of walkabouts. They knew that they had to be seen to be believed, that sense of building a connection. And in so many different ways, we have seen that, I think, since her death, that sense of the royal family wanting us to understand what's going on, wanting to make that connection. And we 100% saw that when it comes to the ceremony of the keys. Louise and I have been talking about this. And Louise, you were pointing out that actually there was a change of plan, you think, when it comes to where the ceremony was carried out?
Yeah, well, part of my recall from my time, I think my understanding was that ceremony might take place in the quadrangle. And I corrected you earlier, you said the forecourt, and I said, no, I think it'd be the quadrangle. And I was wrong. I suspect this is where we're seeing that the new king has been consulted about these plans, and my feeling is that he would perhaps say, well, how is that ceremony usually done? What was the example that was set before? And yes, I like that one. It's about seeing and be seen. And he's just demonstrated that with that walkabout. The king has been very involved in the refurbishment of the Abbey Strand buildings, which were just behind them, where they did that walkabout, and the bathhouse garden. So I'm quite certain that as the car pulled up there, he knew that there was an opportunity to take that time for those people that were there, because he's so familiar with it.
It has been a part, though, hasn't it, of the rehabilitation of Charles and Camilla in the eyes of a certain part of the public, these type of events being accessible, being more open, no more the kind of the state formality. Well, there's quite a lot of formality around on occasions like this, of course, but just literally being a rather more accessible monarch, and more accessible Prince of Wales than you would have perhaps seen even a few years before.
Whatever people think about King Charles III, and yes, he has got his eccentricities, and yes, he has ruffled feathers over the years, and yes, some have said that he has strayed into politics. But one thing that you cannot fault him for is caring and wanting to make a difference to people, whether that is through his charity, the Prince's Trust, with young people, whether that is through his, well, foresight, really, when it comes to the climate crisis. He's also, I think, an emotional man, and realises that there is huge excitement when there's a royal visit, and he realises that people do want to feel that genuine connection with the monarchy. And at this moment of change and the pace of it today, I've just been reminded of the pace of it all. You were talking about what's happening next, and it just keeps going, doesn't it? At a time when we are all trying to adjust to what happened only a few days ago, I think it is about making sure that he's saying to us, look, this is what's happening. Yes, I have to be introduced as king in certain ceremonial ways. And yes, we're seeing pageantry, certainly with the Accession Council, that we hadn't seen for 7 decades. The cameras were allowed in there. The cameras now allowed into the forecourt, gently taking us by the hand in some ways and saying, look, we want this to be open and relatable. And really following on, as Louise was saying and as we've been talking about this morning, following on from the Queen in making sure that the monarchy stays relevant and connected.
It's that word. You used that word, in fact, before, Rhiannon, connection.
Yeah.
Louise, we were talking about this before. I was down at the Palace on Friday, speaking to as many people as I could, vox pops, as we call it. And there, I will guarantee you, there were Republicans and monarchists alike who were saying exactly the same thing. They felt a relationship between themselves and the Queen, even if they had never even met her for some reason. And it was certainly not always like that. Certainly not always like that, I think.
Well, I can't reflect on a time that strikes me. But
There is a stronger bond now, I would say, between the Queen and the country than there was perhaps at certain points in the 90s.
Right, I'm far too young.
The 1990s.
No, I do know what you mean, Neil, and I have just been struck by all the stories and how people have bonded over this, and in a way that has surprised them. They did not know they were going to have this depth of feeling. And I've no doubt, with all these people that have gathered throughout Scotland as the cortege travelled south yesterday, that people have made friends and shared stories, and it's a way of making connections, especially after the pandemic. You know, the Queen famously said, "We will meet again." Under these circumstances, it's very sad, but, you know, she has made connections.
Yeah, well, my mother reminded me last night that it was my younger brother at the age of 2 that somehow managed to escape from the ladies' toilets at Windsor, run off and got lost. Thankfully, he was recovered, so everything's fine in that regard. Let's perhaps turn our attention back towards St Giles Cathedral. Joe Pike is out and about in the streets of Edinburgh at the moment. I've perhaps given him a bit of a heart attack by coming to him quite so quickly, but hopefully, Joe, you can hear me, and I wonder if you might be able to tell me just a little bit about the kind of the mood there, the conversations you'll have been having with the people that have been lining the streets.
Neil, it's a warm, friendly, chatty crowd here outside St Giles Cathedral. You can see some people very prepared with their chairs, with binoculars. Some have brought flags. Certainly there were people already here before our colleagues arrived around 5 a.m. It certainly got busy from about 8 o'clock this morning, and now you can see the crowd, many people deep, some standing on bollards to get a good view of the royal family arriving for this service of Thanksgiving. But also worth pointing out, there are some people towards the back of the crowd or behind these big platforms who will see very little, perhaps even nothing, yet still want to be here to feel the atmosphere of the crowd, but also the atmosphere of this moment. Among them, Karen and Nick, who are here from Canada. Tell us why you've decided to be here.
Well, we actually had a trip planned for 3 months or so. My mother was unable to make it, and so Karen and I came. And at the last minute, we heard about the tragedy of the Queen, and it was just an incredible opportunity to be part of this historic moment. I mean, the Queen has done so much for the world and been part of everyone's life for so long, and then transition to a king. It's an incredible point in history. It's fantastic to be able to be here to see it.
And Karen, what are you hoping to see over the next hour or two?
I'm hoping to see the royal family and to see everybody celebrate the life of Her Majesty.
Karen and Nick, thank you so much for joining us. Not a huge amount now longer to wait, perhaps an hour until that procession starts from Holyrood Palace up to St Giles, the High Kirk of Edinburgh. It's also perhaps worth noting quite how unprecedented a lot of what we will see today in Scotland is. Certainly the procession and service of Thanksgiving has not happened before. This is normally something that just happened in England. Similarly, the 24-hour vigil starting at 5 p.m. That means there are effectively 2 lyings in state or lyings at rest. That hasn't happened before. And then later today, when the new king responds to that motion of condolence from MSPs at the Scottish Parliament. Of course, that did not happen after George VI died in 1952 because, Neil, as you know, the Scottish Parliament was opened in 1999, of course, by Her Majesty the Queen.
Yeah, Joe, just on that topic, in fact, we just saw pictures of the former First Minister Alex Salmond heading into St Giles. You've written a very interesting piece for the website today, which reminded me of the fact that it was, of course, the Queen who reconvened the Scottish Parliament, we should say. I mean, to what extent? I mean, you covered Scottish politics for many a year. You covered Scotland for many a year. To what extent, then, when you look back at that particular period, what was the Queen involved in all of this? Because, you know, you had an SNP government in Edinburgh who was hell-bent on independence for Scotland and, you know, perhaps with some concomitant changes to the royal family as a result. Now we have a situation which, of course, and it's been reiterated over the past couple of days, that, of course, if Scotland were to gain independence under the SNP's plan, the monarch would remain head of state.
They certainly would. The 1603 Union of the Crowns would be retained, but the 1707 Act of the Union would be repealed under those proposals, Neil. Certainly the Queen was determined to be at the heart of that 1999 ceremony to open the Scottish Parliament with this specially commissioned thistle-themed outfit she was wearing, designed by a Scottish designer, a silk green dress, a purple coat. And over the next 2 decades, she was determined to adapt and evolve as Scotland's constitutional position adapted and evolved. It meant that Scotland's First Minister was invited to Balmoral over the summer, a bit like a Prime Minister would be, but 2 nights for a Prime Minister, just 1 for a First Minister. You mentioned Alex Salmond, who's recently walked into St Giles, also, of course, spotted at the Accession Council last week because he's a member of the Privy Council. He also has, in the past, had a very strong relationship with the King, invited for discussions at Birk Hall on the Balmoral estate. And it's also worth noting that King Charles knows the institutions, knows the personalities, because most recently at the opening of the 6th session of the Holyrood Parliament, the Queen was there, but in front of her, in Highland dress and wearing a face mask, was the now King. He knows these institutions, he knows these personalities, and as you say, that is important because the constitutional question, the future of Scotland in the Union, is constantly being posed, constantly being discussed. But as you say, if there was to be a referendum, if Scots were to vote for independence under the current plans, the monarch would remain head of state, just like, Neil, as in Canada or indeed Australia.
Joe, thanks very much indeed. Well, as we look at those pictures of the crowds, and indeed they are crowds gathered outside St Giles, there is a wind blowing through Edinburgh today, but that wind has blown the clouds away. Glorious blue sky just over my shoulder, just outside Holyrood House. Much more from Edinburgh, of course. The procession starting shortly after 2:30. For now, though, let's get back to London. Sarah Jane.
Neil, thank you very much. Welcome back to Buckingham Palace. Still a continuous stream of people here coming to Buckingham Palace to lay flowers and pay their respects to the Queen. The crowds you can expect to continue all week. Well, earlier today, King Charles addressed both Houses of Parliament at Westminster Hall, and he promised to uphold the constitutional conditions under which Parliament sits, while expressing his gratitude for the messages of condolence. Let's take another look at that moment in Westminster earlier on today. Well, the King and his Queen Consort left Clarence House this morning to make the short journey to the Palace of Westminster. There were cheers from the crowds as the motorcade arrived and drove in through the gates. Well, once inside Westminster Hall, members of the Lords and the Commons gathered together, including the current and former Prime Ministers. The ceremony beginning with a speech from the Lord Speaker, Lord John McFall, and the Speaker of the Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle.
Her late Majesty's joyous, unstinting and reassuring presence across the years made it difficult to contemplate that her long and inspiring reign of deep and unparalleled devotion would ever end. We and the nation closed our eyes to this inevitability, but it has ended. Only a few months after we celebrated Her late Majesty's historic Platinum Jubilee. And as you said so movingly, Your Majesty, in your address to the nation, we all now feel a sense of loss beyond measure.
It is a loss to the entire Commonwealth, which she did so much to nurture. It is a loss to all of us, but we know, most of all, it is a loss to you, Your Majesty, and to the royal family. Newspapers have been filled with photographs of Her late Majesty since the news broke. The most touching have been the glimpses into the family life which were usually kept sheltered from public view. Deep as our grief is, we know yours is deeper. We offer our heartfelt sympathy to you and all the royal family.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, I am deeply grateful for the addresses of condolence by the House of Lords and the House of Commons, which so touchingly encompass what our late sovereign, my beloved mother, the Queen, meant to us all. As Shakespeare says of the earlier Queen Elizabeth, she was a pattern to all princes living. As I stand before you today, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us and which reminds us of the vital parliamentary traditions to which members of both houses dedicate yourselves with such personal commitment for the betterment of us all.
At the end of his speech, King Charles and his Queen Consort Camilla left Westminster Hall to rejoin their motorcade, which took them to RAF Northolt, that then saw them board a plane to head to Edinburgh. The King and Queen Consort driving through London to RAF Northolt, where there was that plane waiting to take them to Edinburgh, and then on to the palace of Holyrood House. King Charles and Camilla leading the royal family later today in a procession as the late Queen's coffin moved from the palace of Holyrood House to nearby St Giles's Cathedral. This, the plane taking off en route to Edinburgh with the royal couple on board. At just around 11:30 this morning, dozens of members of the public and photographers watching on as they left. In Northern Ireland, a special sitting of the Stormont Assembly has been held. Sinn Féin Vice President Michelle O'Neill saying that the Queen's life and legacy will be fondly remembered by many people around the world.
On behalf of Sinn Féin, I wish to extend our condolences on the death of Queen Elizabeth II, whose sorrowful loss is felt deeply by her family and by many people across our society, particularly those of Unionist and British tradition, whom, with great pride and devotion, hold Queen Elizabeth and the royal family very dear. Her life and legacy will be fondly remembered by many people around the world. I think everybody will agree that it was a mammoth achievement to have marked 70 years of dedicated public service to the British people when she celebrated her Platinum Jubilee earlier this year. Today I wish to record the value and the respect I place on the significant contribution Queen Elizabeth made to the advancement of peace and to reconciliation between the different traditions on our island and between Ireland and Britain during the years of the peace process. It is appropriate that this is rightfully recognised in this chamber today.
For the last 70 years, she was there, opening Parliament, appointing Prime Ministers, leading our nation in remembrance, awarding honours to the best of those among us, and, even for some, dictating how quickly we ate our Christmas dinner so that we could hear the Queen in time. In an ever-changing world, in times of great national joy and celebration, and in times of sorrow, sadness and grief, she was the anchor, one we could look to for stability, continuity and comfort.
And as we draw together today to pay our tributes to the late Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, I think we first remember that at the heart of all of this, whilst the Commonwealth and this country have lost a monarch, there is a family that are grieving the loss of a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, a confidant and friend and a matriarch, and it is to them that I turn my thoughts first today in offering them my condolences and those of my colleagues. When we reflect on monarchy, of course, we acknowledge that there are a range of views on the institutions. It is one of immense privilege. However, not everyone who is subject to such immense privilege gives so much in return. And I think it is a remarkable achievement not just to have served and to have served on the throne as the Queen did for such a long period, but to have done so with such unswerving dedication to duty, right to her final hours, to have continued in the work to which she was called, I believe is a remarkable legacy that she leaves behind.
Also paying tribute today, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. He released his first official statement since the death of Queen Elizabeth, paying tribute to his grandmother and his father, King Charles. In the statement, Prince Harry said, "Granny, while this final parting brings us great sadness, I am forever grateful for all of our first meetings, from my earliest childhood memories with you to meeting you for the first time as my Commander-in-Chief. To the first moment you met my darling wife and hugged your beloved great-grandchildren. I cherish these times and the many other special moments in between. You are already sorely missed, not just by us, but by the world over." A statement from Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, earlier on today. Well, let's bring in Sky's royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, who is following today's events from Westminster Forest. And Alistair, just a word on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. We saw them and that impromptu walkabout outside Windsor, meeting well-wishers and looking at the floral tributes. While they are no longer senior royals, the King made clear in his speech that they are very much loved members of the family. How much can we expect to see of them this week, do you think?
Well, they're here to mark the death of the Queen, and the Duke of Sussex has made his statement about how deeply he cared for his grandmother, and well we can believe him. It must have been a very treasured relationship for him, particularly as she was there for his wedding, welcomed his wife, the Duchess of Sussex, and so I think both of them will want to be a part of a family farewell, and I'm sure we'll see them throughout the process.
Alistair, thank you, and much more from Alistair Bruce throughout the afternoon. Let's join Ivor Bennett, who is in Green Park. The focus for many people coming here to London to bring floral tributes to the Queen and to take a moment of reflection. Ivor, what have people been saying to you there? The scenes behind me, it is just this steady stream of people. It's been like this for the past 48 hours, and they end up where you are now. What have they been saying to you today?
Yeah, this is where people come to leave their flowers, or if they do leave them at Buckingham Palace, at the gates there, then they're brought here. And as you can see, it's a remarkable sight, very moving indeed. There must be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of bouquets of flowers that have been left here. A lot of people coming here today just to take it all in, to pay their respects. People I've spoken to here spending a number of hours actually reading the messages and paying their respects in their own way. Now, some people we can speak to who have travelled up from Gosport and Fareham in Hampshire to come here to lay flowers are Joe, Lindsay and Lorraine. Joe, first of all, why did you feel the need to make the trip?
To pay our respects, really, for the longest reigning Queen, and just felt the need to come up and lay flowers and soak up all the atmosphere.
And what do you make of it all? I mean, it's quite an amazing sight.
It's incredible, absolutely outstanding, beautiful as well. All the messages. We've been here 2 hours already.
2 hours already?
Yeah.
Wow. How long do you think you'll stay?
I don't know. I think we're going to go over to James's Park after this.
It's a lot to take in, isn't it?
It is an awful lot. Yeah, and she meant so much to everybody, really. So yeah.
Lindsay, what does she mean to you?
I think for me, the Queen is just, although polarising at times, she's very inspiring, and I think she provides a lot of hope to a lot of people, and I really hope that continues with the next with the King. But I think mainly it's just that she had a lot of dignity and grace with everything that she did, and she tried her hardest at all times. I think we can learn a lot from that.
And how did you feel when you saw all this?
I think it's really overwhelming, actually, that so many people have taken time out of their day to come up and lay flowers and make tributes, and there's some really beautiful things that people have left here. I think it's quite moving, to be honest.
Lorraine, what about you? What did the Queen mean to you?
Well, I just think she was a real iconic lady that, did her best for her country, and she's really an inspirational lady as well. And obviously she was a WI member, which we all are too, which is great. And I just think she'll be really, really missed by everybody. But I'm really hoping that the King will just fill her shoes, in some small way.
Do you think he will?
Oh,
presumably?
absolutely. I think he will. I'm hopeful. I think he's going to do a really good job.
And just very quickly, this isn't the last trip you're going to be making to London this week, is it? You're going to be coming back to see...
Hopefully not. We're hopefully going to come and see her laying in state, and hopefully we're going to be able to manage to do that.
Thank you very much. Well, just some of the tens of thousands we expect who'll be coming here today to Green Park to pay their respects and to take in this really remarkable sight.
Ivor, thank you. Ivor Bennett there in Green Park in central London. Today, the focus for mourners and those wishing to pay their respects is Edinburgh. These are the latest pictures we have of the King and Queen Consort arriving at Holyrood House. Later, the Queen's coffin will travel from the Palace of Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh today. The King, we understand, will walk behind his mother's coffin with his siblings, Princes Edward Andrew and the Princess Royal. We will be back in Edinburgh in a few short moments. Well, the focus very much today on Scotland. These are the latest pictures of King Charles and the Queen Consort Camilla arriving at the Palace of Holyrood House. The Queen's coffin will travel from the palace later today to St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. We understand that the procession will begin at around 2:30 this afternoon. This is after the King meets with both Houses of Parliament earlier today. He made the trip from London to Scotland. We understand that after the Queen has made that short trip from the Palace of Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral, there will be a service of prayer and reflection on the life of the late monarch. Well, in the last hour or so, the plane carrying the King and Queen Consorts touched down, taking them to where you were just witnessing those scenes at the Palace of Holyrood. They stepped into their waiting car and were driven into Edinburgh as part of that motorcade. King Charles and the Queen Consorts then headed to Holyrood House. The royal couple arriving at the palace and greeted waiting crowds outside. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills saying that this was entirely unexpected, but as is the nature of the new king, he wants to be in amongst the people and those who turn out to see him. You can see him there shaking hands and taking time to talk to those who have made the trip to Edinburgh today to pay their respects to his mother and also to wish him well as he starts his life as king. They were looking at flowers outside the palace before then speaking to members of the military. A 21-gun salute was then carried out to welcome the new king to Edinburgh. King Charles was then handed the key of the city of Edinburgh. Well, let's join our correspondent James Matthews, who is at St Giles Cathedral for us. And James, we've just been taking viewers what has been happening so far today. What happens from this point on? Talk us through events.
Well, at 2:30, that's when we will see the hearse and the coffin wrapped in the Royal Standard of Scotland emerge on the forecourt of the Palace of Holyrood House. Behind that will stand the Queen's 4 children, Charles, King Charles III, the Duke of York, and Edward and the Princess Royal. They will be accompanied at various points by the Royal Company of Archers, the Queen's traditional bodyguard, and together they will move up Edinburgh's Royal Mile behind me. It's a distance of something like just short of a mile, actually, by the time they get to St Giles Cathedral. It should take something like 20 minutes, but it will be a poignant scene, a scene of a mother lost with her children walking behind her in accompaniment. But it would also be a monarch past and the new monarch present. So it is very much a picture of history and of change in a corner of Edinburgh, Scotland's capital, you know, where ancient tradition is anchored and history has been shaped through the years. And I think that's what we're seeing today, in the form of the hearse, the children, the sights, the sounds, the music. We can hear the band of the Royal Regiment of Scotland just making their way down the Royal Mile. They are part of today's service of Thanksgiving, which has attracted a crowd of something like 5,000-6,000, I would guess, lining the streets, coming from around the UK and indeed from around the world. People sensing here that this is a moment in time, a moment of change, of history, but also a moment to share their feelings with each other and with the royal family itself. You know, in the immediate aftermath of the Queen's passing, there was that period where their process of grieving as a family took place behind the gates of Balmoral. We saw that change yesterday. Wider society was invited to become a part, to share in the loss, when we saw that journey south of some 6.5 hours of the coffin through Aberdeen, Dundee and on towards Edinburgh. I think we see that again today, the family out in the street, walking yards from the people who have gathered here. So it will be very much, it will be intimate for them. They will see people, they won't be far from them, they will hear people. And of course, you know, this has been years in the preparation. What the people who haven't been prepared for it are the public themselves. How will they respond? That will be interesting to know. Yesterday we saw some who stood bowed head in silence, others who threw flowers and who applauded. So it's the public's chance to say their farewells and to share with each other in the power of the shared experience at what is a time of loss, and for many people is difficult.
So, James, we're just watching events on the Royal Mile, as you've referred to throughout today, and a scene that's witnessed so much history and tradition. This is a first chance for mourners in Scotland to pay their respects. Yesterday, well-wishers were lining the roads between the Highlands estate of Balmoral and the Scottish capital as the Queen left Balmoral for the final time. Today, they will see what will be for the royal family and the rest of the United Kingdom the long goodbye. We'll see the King walk behind his mother's coffin with his siblings.
Yeah, A long goodbye indeed, and of course it will go on, because tomorrow the Queen will be flown south, and the funeral will take place on the 19th of September. Between now and then, there will be the opportunity in Westminster Hall for people to file past the coffin. That will be the case here, because after the service of Thanksgiving in St Giles, members of the public are being invited to view the Queen at rest. It is quite a logistical operation, I might say. In Edinburgh's Meadows, which is a park about half a mile that way, wristbands are being issued, and the plan there will be that after the service is finished at 5:30, they'll be invited to go into St Giles, view the Queen, and several thousand are expected. It's expected to go on through the night. Initially, there will be a vigil posted by the sons and daughter of Her Majesty. Thereafter, through the night, that vigil will be continued by the Royal Company of Archers. So, history. It will be interesting to view that in itself. Interesting to the extent that many thousands of people have signed up to do so.
We are literally watching history unfold here on Sky News. I just want to bring in Sky's royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, who is watching events from Westminster. Alistair, this is your home city. You're the governor of Edinburgh Castle. Perhaps you can give viewers a sense of what we're watching on our screens here this afternoon. Talk us through what's happening.
Well, because not only the late Queen, but also the King of Scotland, or King of Scots, will shortly be here at St Giles. The Royal Company of Archers, the King's bodyguard for Scotland, have all formed up as a guard of honour. They're being checked into their positions by the officers, and particularly by the adjutant, who's helped organise this, Brigadier Major Jamie Fraser, who's checking that everybody's in place, and their own Sergeant Major also checking that after quite a lot of practice. And the Royal Company of Archers were invited to volunteer to take part in this, and apparently every single one of them has offered their time, and they will provide a salute on the arrival in that very precious area of the Parliament Square. They also have their colours there, which are draped with the mourning bands, carried by the officers, including there in the centre of the picture, my predecessor as Governor of Edinburgh Castle, Major General Mike Riddle-Webster, carrying the colours of the Royal Company of Archers. Pipes and drums stand by.
Alistair, as we're watching this unfold, there was just a shot of a young girl in the crowd there carrying a sign that said, "Thank you, Mum," with a picture of Paddington Bear. And I think what we've seen from the King so far over the last couple of days is just how much he wants to be in and amongst the people. We saw him greeting well-wishers on his arrival at Edinburgh, from what we understand, completely unplanned. As you said, these things are regimented to the finest degree. Talk to me about what kind of relationship King Charles wants to foster with the people.
Well, that remains to emerge, but I think that he's always had this nature of wanting to get in amongst people, and why not? You know, it's the best way to learn from whatever position he has exactly who is doing what in what way in the United Kingdom. We're seeing one of the guards of honour from the Royal Company of Archers forming down at Holyrood Palace. So they are taking their position, also going to be playing their part in supporting inside the service, and they're passing by the French consul there. The consular authority is based in that building. I think for the King, it's very much for him the chance to make sure that while he takes part in every element of national life, there's no point doing it from a Rolls-Royce. You need to meet people, and particularly those who have come to Edinburgh in order to leave their floral tributes. The Royal Company of Archers marching around there will be part of those who form the vigil on the Queen's catafalque. They will take position and they will do their period of vigil on her as she lies at rest in the cathedral later on. They're passing now into the Signet Library, which is just beside Parliament Square, and you can see the cathedral just ahead of us. And in the Signet Library is where there's plenty of room for them to start their regular patrols out to take over one after the other in holding guard over the late Queen. We're going to see a great deal of preparation here as people gather in order to play their part in this ceremonial arrival of the Queen at the High Kirk and followed by the King and other members of the royal family in a procession that will also involve the arrival of the Crown of Scots, which will be placed upon Queen Elizabeth II while she is here. A crown that was made in 1540 by King James V and was first used at the coronation of Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1543. It's the oldest crown in the United Kingdom. It survived Cromwell. And it has, therefore, a real resonance for the identity of this nation. It was actually hidden from Cromwell. It was taken off to the east coast and hidden in Dunnottar Castle, where it was then pursued by Cromwell's troops. It was therefore hidden and then smuggled away by those who managed to get it into a basket covered in kelp, and women who were clearing the kelp from the beach below the castle walked past Cromwell's sentries and hid the crown away. So it carries a great deal of history and the identity of this beautiful kingdom. Meanwhile, at Holyrood, the Guard of Honour, who we saw receiving the King, now getting ready in order to escort Queen Elizabeth II up the Royal Mile. They're being put in line. And shortly they'll be in position, just being checked by the Garrison Sergeant Major, Warrant Officer First Class, Anthony Gibson from the Scots Guards, just checking their dressing, making sure they're ready for this part of the parade.
Well, inside will be those royal family members who will process behind the coffin. The question, of course, will be asked what dress they'll be wearing. Ceremonial uniform, we're told, from the King. But Rhiannon Mills, our royal correspondent, is here. And we'd had this question too, didn't we, at the funeral for the Duke of Edinburgh. It does appear that Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, will be wearing mourning suit, but with his medals and decorations, not least his South Atlantic Medal. And he will find this upsetting because he, of course, is a veteran of war.
Yes, so you might remember the funeral for the Duke of Edinburgh, we saw members of the royal family walk behind his coffin, and it was decided on that occasion that members of the royal family, rather than wearing military uniform, would wear mourning dress. And at the time, I think that was to try and draw attention away from the questions about Prince Andrew, but also Prince Harry, of course. He has stepped away from royal life, and Prince Andrew also had his difficulties. Again, I think the royal family trying to put clarity on the situation as we prepare to see the Queen's coffin once again. And they have confirmed that because he is a non-working member of the royal family, the Duke of York is not going to wear uniform. However, he will wear military uniform as a special mark of respect for the Queen at the final vigil in Westminster Hall. But there are in total going to be 5 different occasions where we're going to see other members of the family wearing their uniforms. And we now know that it is going to be the King leading his 3 siblings, also accompanied by their spouses as well, who will follow behind the Queen's hearse as it makes its way from the Palace of Holyrood House all the way up to St Giles. And I think when it comes to marking the Queen's death, the involvement of the military is front and centre, allowing the military to pay their own tribute to their commander-in-chief. But also, I think for the royal family, also recognising how important the armed forces were to the Queen as a military wife, as a military mother. And members of the royal family are incredibly proud of both their service and their affiliations with various regiments. But as you said, this will be difficult for the Duke of York, who we know is a veteran of the Falklands.
The Royal Mile, where history was made, I think our Scotland correspondent James Matthews described. I certainly noticed the Murcat Cross of Canongate dates to 1128, so certainly this is desperately historic and difficult for the authorities too, because it is now, you see the crowds there, they've been waiting patiently to get a view, but also to hope to process past the coffin when it will be opened up to the public later on today. And this will be the first time, I know the attention will be on Westminster later this week, but this will be the first time that people will be able to make that journey.
The crowds have been gathering for hours now, and as we saw yesterday, as the Queen's coffin was brought first here to Edinburgh, 15, sometimes 20 deep amongst those crowds. And again, people of Scotland, tourists alike, have all wanted to gather together to say that they were here for this moment. But also, I think when we look at those pictures, it's worth noting just how narrow the street is. And I think this is going to be a moment where the public are going to get possibly the closest that they will get to members of the royal family throughout the next, 7 days. There is going to be so much ceremony, and members of the public, as we've seen earlier, the new King Charles wants to make sure that everyone feels involved, that everyone shares in this moment of grief. But as we see them walking behind the hearse, people are going to be incredibly close, and it'll be fascinating, really, to watch the response of members of the royal family, but also the crowds. And I think it will bring a poignancy, an energy that we didn't have when we saw the coffin driving past alone in the hearse yesterday.
And early arrivals at St Giles Cathedral, this high kirk of Edinburgh. We've had more details from Buckingham Palace of who is in there, as well as the royal family, the Lord Lion King of Arms, who is the equivalent of the Duke of York in terms of the organiser of this part of the arrangements after the death of Her Majesty the Queen here in Scotland. Heralds, royal archers, members of the Order of the Thistle, friends and family of the Queen, the royal household, the military, representatives from all the armed forces in Scotland to whom the Queen held so dear. And you can see more arriving as they enter the church. But Rhiannon, also representatives of Civic Society of Scotland and those patronages and charities that the Queen would have taken so seriously here as well.
And I think it's going to have a very inclusive feel. And the pageantry almost gives an air of, well, we'd expect dignitaries, we'd expect political figures, but also it's interesting that youth organisations and also a broad selection of faith groups, while the Queen often, especially in her Christmas message, described how her own Christian faith sustained her, helped her through very difficult times. And we saw at St Paul's Cathedral on the day after she died how members of the public were invited in to spend some time to pause and reflect. Today, this is about all faiths, people of faith, those of none, able to come together to sit and remember her. And, of course, the royal family will be central to the involvement of this service.
Well, we saw those minute guns which will be fired from Edinburgh Castle while the coffin moves in procession to St Giles Cathedral. And the music, we are told, will be the music of thanksgiving and celebration for the long reign of our monarch.
And I think for the royal family, and certainly this was something that we saw for Prince Philip's funeral, and there is no doubt we will also see this for the state funeral of the Queen, which we know is going to happen on Monday the 19th of September. The music and what that says and the atmosphere that builds within the service, they're very conscious of that. They're very passionate about those choices of music. So I think this will be a reflection of what the royal family would have wanted in terms of the music that will accompany this deeply moving moment as we wait for the royal family to leave the Palace of Holyrood House. You can see those involved in this procession heading towards where we are waiting, and in the next 15 minutes or so the royal family will leave the Palace of Holyrood House. Today, I think, again, I've been struck by the pace of all of this. Everything is happening very quickly, but I think when we see that procession start to leave, around half an hour it's due to take to get to St Giles, a time to pause for silence and to reflect.
Well, the route from the palace to St Giles will go through the Abbey Strand gate, up Abbey Strand, Cannon Gate, up the High Street towards St Giles Cathedral. James Matthews is there, and there is a sense of quiet, James, as they anticipate the events to come.
Yes, quiet. I think that's right, Anna. There is and there has been, you know, I've been at Balmoral, as have you, and over the course of those initial days, there has been a quiet sorrow. I think the mood of the crowd turning up to lay flowers and tribute has been very solemn and respectful. And, you know, I get that sense here today. Although I would say that the crowd generally is good-humoured. There is much chatter, you know, much, you know, laughing. Now and again you hear 3 cheers being sounded for Her Majesty. So they are in good spirits. And it will be interesting. It's a narrow street, the Royal Mile, you know, and it will be intimate for the people involved in this, those who are walking behind the Queen's coffin, and that is, of course, the new King and his brothers and sisters. So it is the opportunity for wider society to engage. We had those initial couple of days when a family's grief took place behind the gates of Balmoral. Wider society now is being invited to share their feelings, both yesterday with that lengthy drive south and particularly today. You know, the royal family are well within earshot of people who have turned out to share their condolences. So the crowd interaction is one thing, I think, to look out for here today. And, you know, looking around, I'm looking at the front of St Giles. You see the Royal Company of Archers, traditionally the Queen's bodyguard. Now, of course, the King's traditional bodyguard. It's very colourful. Behind them stands the band of the Royal Regiment of Scotland, and, you know, people from Scottish society, people who have interacted with the royal family, politicians, Civic Scotland. They are gathered inside for a service that will be one of thanksgiving. It will hear a lesson from Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. There will be music from around the world that is thought to be fitting to Her Majesty and choices that she would have wanted. There will be a Gaelic song sung by the Scottish folk singer Karen Matheson. So there are touches in line with Her Majesty's wishes, and I think, looking at the crowd lining the road, and again I can see something like 3,000. Further on there will be thousands more. I know that this kind of public response is welcomed by the royal family, because people involved in yesterday's events, where we saw crowds lining the streets through Ballater, Aberdeen, Dundee and on to Edinburgh, they were heartened by the numbers who turned out, not just because of the spectacle, but for the sentiment that was being offered to them and to their mother. They viewed it as gratitude and affection, I'm told. So that was good for them yesterday. That helped them deal with their loss, and this will today. And of course, we're in Scotland today. Tomorrow, attention will turn to London, where wider UK society will be able to pay their respects as well. In Westminster Hall, the body will lie in state. The body here, the coffin here, will lie at rest overnight. Initially, after 5:30 p.m, the Queen's children, Andrew, Edward, Charles and Anne, they will post a four-cornered vigil around the coffin. And thereafter, through the night, the Royal Company of Archers, who you see standing in front of St Giles in dark green uniform, they will form that guard through the night, vigil through the night, before the journey south tomorrow at 6 p.m. And between now and then, members of the public here are being invited to view the Queen's coffin, and they have signed up to do so in considerable numbers, many thousands expected to do that over the course of the coming hours. But first of all, we have that service of thanksgiving. Not long now, the time 2:26, it's due to start forming up at 2:30, so we're about to begin.
So we see the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, arriving. She will have a private audience with King Charles later. Behind her, Douglas Ross, leader of the Conservatives, Anna Sawar, leader of Labour here in Scotland too. And attention later this afternoon will move to the